Apple is facing a new class action lawsuit over the blood oximeter on the Apple Watch. A New York man claims the watch has a racial bias against those with darker skin tones.
Yeah, Alex Morales says he bought an Apple Watch a few years ago and was aware of the oxygen tracking device, but the lawsuit says, quote, for decades, there have been reports that such devices were significantly less accurate in measuring blood oxygen levels based on skin color. And it says during the pandemic, researchers confirmed the significance of racial bias in pulse oximetry. Wendy Patrick is a career trial attorney and representing the plaintiff in the National Report Court. Alina Habba is a managing partner at Habba, Madeo and Associates. She'll be joining us shortly, and she'll be defending Apple. If you could start by explaining this case, what's exactly going on here? A lot of people, they take a look at that headline there and they scratch their head and say, wait a minute, racial bias in an Apple Watch?
Well, since I may be arguing both sides of these, let me start with Latin, as any good lawyer would. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Anybody buying a gadget nowadays should know what it does, what it's supposed to do, what it can do, and what they can reasonably rely upon it for. And that last language, that's very important. Because when you buy an Apple Watch, I mean, it does all sorts of things, just like many other gadgets do. But it's not a medical device. However, what this plaintiff is arguing is they should have been able to rely reasonably on the representations that it was, that it could engage in, and I think this is the terminology, pulse oximetry. In other words, you can look at your blood alcohol level, not yet, but you can look at your oxygen level on the Apple Watch, and that you should be able to rely on that regardless of your demographic background. Actually, that's not true. Apparently, it is more accurate when it's trying to measure a Caucasian skin than black skin. And the plaintiff is basically saying, I should have known that. I probably wouldn't have bought it.
It's an interesting argument, right? We always find these unique cases for our National Report Court. Alina Habba is with us now, and we're going to hear now Apple's defense. So Apple did not respond for comments from several media outlets, but we dug up on the website this. It reads, quote, blood oxygen app measurements are not intended for medical use, including self-diagnosis or consultation with the doctor, and are only designed for general fitness and wellness purposes. Alina, how does this statement play into the defense?
I think that's exactly what their defense is going to be. We are not replacing a physician. We are not trying to take the place of anybody else. You shouldn't rely on this. I think that's basically what they're saying. You can't rely on the product, and they'll indicate that this was a general waiver, and that this person, should not be purchasing something solely for this purpose. It is a bonus or a nice extra of the watch, but it's not the main purpose of the watch. So buying the product should not have been based on that alone.
Wendy, how does this case end?
Well, it could end, with many people joining this class action. I mean, the plaintiff is arguing that he's not the only one that thought that this watch could do what it purported that it could. So, on the other side of this coin is the buyer should be able to reasonably rely on representations made. So if, in fact, there are enough plaintiffs to certify the class and it moves forward, a judge is going to have to decide how much words matter. Does this thing really measure that kind of what it claims that it does? Or should buyers basically have known that it's not a medical device? It's sometimes just a watch.
Alina, does that sort of work into that conversation? Should that have been more apparent when someone is purchasing the item? Should Apple have been more upfront about it, maybe included it directly on the packaging?
I would never advise Apple to include something on packaging that indicates that if your skin is a darker color, this may not be as effective. I think that in the situation and the climate that we're in, it would be inappropriate. And frankly, they would end up in the same position, which is a class action lawsuit based on discrimination of one person's skin color over the other. And I'm sure Wendy would agree with me. It's a really difficult thing because honestly, it does sound like this is not necessarily an intentional bias, but rather it's just reading it and having darker skin. I have olive skin. Having any darker skin might be harder than somebody with fair skin. So if that's the case, I think they have an out. If it really is something where they put a product out that just doesn't work, if you have dark skin, but they purported it to, that's going to be a harder case to fight.
You know, Wendy, I wonder, does Apple get a pass here for being what many Americans, folks around the world would perceive to be a liberal company? Do they get an out with this?
How interesting you bring that point up, because that's actually something that was mentioned in the lawsuit, is that they were labeled as progressive and that they should have known about this distinction. I'll tell you, you bring up another really good point. Sometimes companies don't know about whether or not their products work differently on people from different demographic backgrounds until it's too late, i.e. a lawsuit is filed. So while this one may not have the power that maybe it would have if there was any evidence of intentional bias, so far there isn't, it remains to be seen whether or not this actually changes the way that companies label their products, whether or not they want to decide that less is more, or whether they want to have a disclaimer saying that different people may experience the accuracy of a product like this differently.
Final thoughts to you, Alina, again, on that categorization of Apple as more of a progressive company, that allegation there.
I think that that's going to be in consideration. They don't have a systemic problem or a repetitive proof that they've constantly been, discriminating or any of that. So that's going to help their case, to be honest. And also, I think, like Wendy said, and we've indicated, it's going to be about discovery. They're going to have to look into what historically they did, what testing they did, and how much they knew. If they had knowledge that this would not work for a certain demographic, but sold it at the same price, they're going to have a serious uphill battle. So I think that's where this case will turn. It'll be in what discovery and what they knew when they were producing the product.
All right, we're going to wait and see what happens. Thanks for laying it out with us today. Wendy Patrick and Alina Habba joining us for National Report Court. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
No crooked establishment.
None of that twisting the
truth.
No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax.
Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think.
They let
me decide. Newsmax.
Real news
for real people.